This is the first in a series of oral histories conducted by the Historical Society of Winters to record and preserve local historically interesting information, voices, memories, and perspectives from members of our community. My name is Susan von Geldern, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors for the Winters Historical Society. Today, September 3rd, 2024, I have the privilege of interviewing Janet Johnston, who went from a childhood in Winters to the national stage, becoming co-chair of the Republican National Committee, along with George H. Bush during President Nixon's administration. So Janet, you've had an amazing life, and I want to explore that in depth, but I'd like to start our interview with a story of your family's history in the Winters area. So when did your family first arrive here, and where did they originally settle?
My great-grandfather, Reverend Thomas McConnell Johnston, came out on the stagecoach from Missouri in 1859 and arrived in San Jose, and from there he established a church in Alamo, he established a church in St. Helena, in Napa, in Stockton, and here in Winters.
That's quite an amazing story right there. So he came in 1859, and I think there's quite a fascinating story that follows this with his wife, your great-grandmother.
Yes, my great-grandmother was Eleanor Steele Johnston, and she followed in the stagecoach in 1860 with 3 boys and 1 daughter, and it was a 21-day trip and 21-night trip until my great-grandfather met them in San Jose. Now my great-grandmother, Eleanor, is known as the first woman to come to California on the stagecoach. And they both are buried here in the Winters Cemetery in the Masonic section. So the family goes back 4 generations with me here in California. And I would say now in my mother's side of the family, my grandfather and grandmother were both born in Slovakia. And they met in Pittsburgh. They immigrated to the United States, met in Pittsburgh and married there, and then came out west. And my grandfather first settled in Santa Cruz, and then here in Winters, and he owned a meat market and grocery store. And that was in about 1926.
And I believe there's addition to the story on this too, because you recently published a book that deals with that Slovakian side of your family, and eventually they are here in this area in your story, which is quite
true.
Remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, the book is called Unknown Destiny, and I named it that, or titled that, because there's one thing all of us in the whole world, all of us, have one thing in common, and that is the minute we're born, we all have an unknown destiny. And the story is about my grandparents coming, first living in Slovakia and then coming to this country.
On your father's side, the great-grandparents coming here and his being a minister and starting all of those Presbyterian churches, where did they live when they first came right to this area?
My great-grandfather was born in Logan County, Russellville, in 1811. And my great-grandmother was born in Franklin, Tennessee. I forget which date now, but not far behind him. And they met in Missouri and were married in 1837 in Greene County, Springfield, Missouri. And that's when my great-grandfather was what they called a circuit rider with the Presbyterian Church. And he also established a church there in Springfield and established another church in the Ozark area. And they were living then there when they decided to come to California. Or he did, and of course she followed the year after.
And when they first arrived in the Winters area, where did they live?
Where did they live? They lived actually in Monticello.
In Monticello.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that's where my father was born. Yes, but the family, the Johnstons, my third great-grandfather arrived with his brother, Dr. Lancelot Johnston, from Northern Ireland in 1769. And they both fought during the Revolutionary War. Lancelot Johnston, Dr. Johnston, was one of the doctors to George Washington and had given him a silver knee buckles for his service. And my great-grandfather, David Johnston, was born in 1745 in Northern Ireland. And they both came over and landed in Charleston in 1869. But David, my third great-grandfather, fought in the war and he lost his left arm in one of the battles. So it's quite an interesting history of the Johnstons. Before that, they were in Scotland, and Jenny MacDonald, who was the Lord of Glencoe's daughter, married James Johnston. He was killed in one of the battles, and she came over to Northern Ireland with her son, who also was named James.
That's a lot of history there in a nutshell.
Oh, one history that I am very proud of knowing is that I am a direct descendant of King James I of England and King James VI of Scotland, and the mother was Mary Queen of Scots. But I don't want that part of history because I wouldn't want to lose my head.
Well, that's amazing. Let me get back to and ask you, when your great-grandfather came here, did other family members come and settle in Monticello area?
They followed
also?
afterwards, yes. He had one of his daughters who was already married when he and Eleanor came out here, but they decided to come to California, and they lived in the Napa area. And I still have a lot of cousins that are related to them.
And so what type of work did the rest of the family do?
They were ranchers, except for Finus Ewing Johnston, who was the oldest son of Eleanor and Thomas, was a very prominent attorney in Napa. And at one time he was a member of the California legislature.
And so how were all of these stories passed down to you?
Well, I did over 45 years of genealogy, research, talking to cousins, and people I'd never met before but were related. And I gleaned all this information, and some of it of which, because of the stagecoach trip, the Wells Fargo Museum in San Francisco has quite a bit of history on the family.
And so what are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Well, my earliest childhood memories are going to a one-room schoolhouse on the corner of our ranch, Buckeye School, and they had all 8 grades. And my earliest memory is of joy raising my sheep and raising my hogs and raising my horses and livestock. I've always loved animals, I think, because of that early childhood experience.
So the family kind of migrated, or some members, out of Monticello and down to the Buckeye area?
Yes, my grandfather, James Richard Johnston.
And then what did they raise on the ranch?
Oh, they had, one time, the largest hog farm in Yolo County, but they raised grain, wheat, barley, and rice at one time also. And then afterwards, the things progressed. We did not have the livestock, but it was just diversified farming. So it turned into sugar beets and tomatoes and, as I say, diversified crops.
So did you still continue to see, did family members get together? Did you see the families who stayed in Monticello? Annual gatherings or holiday celebrations, did that occur?
Well, I can remember the earliest memories of celebration was in Thanksgiving. And that's when everybody got together at my grandmother Johnston's, and we made homemade tamales. The Johnstons never had turkey. They had the old Mexican heritage, I suspect, of California, and we had tamales for Thanksgiving. And then at Christmas, we would come into town in Winters, where my mother's parents were, and that's when we had turkey.
Well, that's an interesting California twist on holidays for a family that came from Scotland and Northern Ireland, I'd say.
Yes.
A true American, a California story. How did you feel about growing up in this community?
Oh, it was wonderful. Everybody knew everybody, and God forbid if any of the kids got into trouble, because before they got home, the parents already knew about it.
And when you went to the one-room schoolhouse, how many children were there typically, and then what happened after you progressed out of that school?
They had all 8 grades, as I said, one teacher. And I thought it was very interesting, the fact, as I look back, how much more you learned in a one-room school, because you would be taught your first grade curricula, and then you'd hear the teacher passing through the various grades going up to 8th grade. So you heard what was being taught to older students. And I graduated in 1953 from Buckeye School with 3 other students. James, Jane, Judy, and Janet. That's me.
And then you went to...
From there I went to Winters High School.
Okay. And then after that, did you attend college?
Yes, I had a music scholarship to the College of Pacific. It's called the University of the Pacific now. But I decided not to pursue that. I was really interested in languages. So I studied French and German, and I attended the Monterey Institute of Foreign Studies and learned fluent French.
And then what path did that put you on, or did a first job come out of that experience?
No, after that I went home, and I was helping, with the ranch and whatnot, and I invented the 4-way flashing signal that is on our cars now. If you see the triangle on your dashboard, that's the 4-way flasher, emergency flasher. And I invented that in I got the patent in 1965.
Well, that's a rather incredible thing to invent, and so did that. Why don't you tell us how that came about? How did you figure that idea out?
I was going across the old causeway to college, and I was coming west on the old causeway, and it was only a two-lane causeway in those days. And about a quarter of a mile ahead, I could see trucks and cars putting on their rear brakes, or rear brakes, that's where they are, they were slowing down, and it was the sunlight right, coming from the west, right direct in your eyes. And I thought, aha, if I can see that about a quarter of a mile with the direct sun in my eyes, your first reaction is to take your foot off the accelerator and be prepared to hit the brake. And that's when the idea of the emergency flashing signal came to mind. So I got home and I told my dad about it. And of course, one thing I think was good training too was I was a member of 4-H and a Silver Star, and I had several projects, one of which was electricity. So that's when I decided to get into my little Ford Anglia and see if I could get the emergency light working. So I went into town, I bought some 14 gauge wire, and I bought a flasher, and I bought a toggle switch. And I went into the garage and I told Dad what I was going to do. And he said, well, I'll help you. And I said, no, that's all right. I know you've got things to do. So I worked on that thing, oh gosh, a good week on and off. And I had everything flashing. I had the dashboard flashing. I had the headlights flashing. I had everything flashing except I wanted the turn signals, front and rear, to flash. Well, at 1 o'clock one morning, I got it going. And I ran into the house, and my parents were sound asleep, and I went into the bedroom, and I said, I got it, it works. And sure, they both got up, got on their bathrobes and slippers, and went out to the garage, and sure enough, my dad said, yep, you got it. So from there, I found a patent attorney in Sacramento, and it's history from there.
That's a great invention. Great
invention. If you look on the computer, you can see that the U.S. Patent Office, and my patent is there.
So in the local community, did you belong to clubs and organizations?
Yes, I did. I belonged to the Chamber of Commerce, and eventually I'm known to be the first woman president of the Winters Chamber of Commerce, and the youngest one. So, and I was also on the board of directors of the county Chamber of Commerce as well. Then I was a member of the Republican Party here, and we had a nice women's group, and so I was quite active in that.
So does this become the beginning of working your way up to how eventually you became co-chair of the Republican National Committee? Tell us how this
yes, I guess
transpired.
You might say I got an orientation of my feet wet in politics at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I was president of the Women's Club, so I invited Nancy Reagan. Ronald Reagan was governor at that time, and I invited Nancy Reagan to come to Winters for a luncheon and meet the ladies. And she said to me, she said, well, Janet, I'd be happy to come, but don't ask me to speak. I said, okay, that's fine. We'd just love to have you come. So I know Winters had quite a to-do when they saw the black limousine coming through town, going west to Mrs. Varian's house. That's where we had the luncheon. And as I said, created quite a stir for the governor's wife to come to Little Winters, and Winters was little in that time. So I think she felt so comfortable amongst us that she turned to me and she said, Janet, I think I will say a few things. So I said, would love to have you say something. So she got up and gave an off-the-cuff speech, and so that was that. So next the lady said, how are you going to top that one, Janet? You're still president and you have to have the programs. So I got to thinking at that point was Ivy Baker Priest was our state treasurer, and she was national treasurer of the United States, during Eisenhower's administration. She settled in California and ran for political office as the Treasury. And she won. And I was, well, I'm getting a little ahead of the story, but the second speaker for our women's club was at Martha Button's house. And I invited Ivy Baker Priest to be our guest and to speak to us. And we rented the gymnasium. Well, we didn't rent, but we had permission to rent the gymnasium so that people could hear her speak. So a lot of people in town were able to come to the gymnasium and hear her speak, and many of whom, of course, were Democrats. So after that, Ivy went back to Sacramento, and I was in the house painting my mother's bedroom, Dad's bedroom, when the phone rang, and my mother answered the phone, and she said, "Janet, it's Ivy Baker Priest. She wants to talk to you." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I put my paintbrush down and went to the phone. And she said, "Janet, I'd like to have you chair my re-election committee. And would you do it?" And I said, "Well, I'd be very honored to do it." Which I did. And Ivy won every single county in the state of California for re-election.
Well, you must have been an incredible promoter of your candidates to pull that off.
Well, I know that when Eisenhower ran for election, here's the button that said, "I like Ike." And I had buttons made that says, "I love Ivy."
So, okay, so you've taken on that role, which is a leap above the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Winters. So what's the next level? Where do you go with that?
Well, the next level was Ronald Reagan asked me to be the National Committee woman for the state of California. And again, I was the youngest ever to serve on the National Committee and the only woman from California so far to this day. So I went back to Washington and did my duty as co-chairman of the party. It was not a good time to go back because it was right in Watergate, and it was quite a stressful position to go through. So then, after that, I went with the Department of State and studied at the Chamber of the Commerce, Department of Commerce, as a member of the Department of State. And I was appointed to be the commercial attaché at our embassy in Paris, France. So I spent 3 years there promoting American products and whatnot. So
the French came in handy.
What's that?
Your French language came in handy.
Oh, indeed it did. Yes, it did. So, and I love Paris. I still to this day. It's one of my favorite cities, actually.
So then you come back from France, and what happens next?
Well, my parents are getting elderly, and we had 4 ranches along with my uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And my uncle was even older than my dad. So they said, "Janet, could you come and manage the ranches for us and whatnot?" And I said, "Yes, I can do that." So I came back and took on the role as manager, wrote the leases, got the tenants, interviewed them. Yeah, it was quite a interesting thing to do. Plus, I was home, and at that time, I was able to raise Arabian horses, breed them, raise them, and show them. And that was one of my pet loves. and also my West Highland White Terrier dogs, one of whom was awarded the Award of Merit at the Westminster Dog Show in Washington, in New York at the Madison Square Garden.
Now, how do you go from just starting to raise dogs to getting to Westminster?
Well, I was on the dog circuit here in California, and then he was winning Best of Show all over, and so somebody said, well, why don't you get him back east to New York for the Westminster show? So I said, well, I guess I'll have to find a handler, because that's pretty high stuff. And which I did. I found a handler in New Jersey, and Johnny, that was the name of my dog, Johnny. And I went to New York, and then he won the Award of Merit. So that was quite a thrill.
I'm almost speechless, because in every category of everything you took on, you wound up being at the top of the game, a leader in the areas. And what do you attribute that to?
Well, I think I go back to what my mother said. A child has to have a good foundation. It's like building a house. You can put up the walls, you can put up the roof, you can put the floor down, but if you don't have a good foundation, eventually it's going to crumble. It's not going to be as strong as it could be. So I go back to what my mother taught. I went to church regularly. I am a Christian. I'm religious in that way. And I think that I had a lot of love from my grandparents. I never knew my grandfather, Johnston. He passed away before I was born. But I had a lot of love and attention and encouragement. And I think I'm never married. In fact, the fellow I was going to marry was Ivy Baker Priest's son. And he was killed on the Sacramento River in a boating accident. So I'm never married, and of course I've never had children, but I love children. And I used to teach piano and accordion to children when I was here in Winters at the ranch.
There's sadness.
And at one time when I was in high school, I played concert accordion, and at times I would go to Old Channel 40 in Sacramento, and they'd have me perform and that was before color television. That was in black and white.
So I want to backtrack a little bit on the political, going up that political ladder. So we were at the stage where Reagan is in office, but we didn't follow through on how you wound up being co-chair of the Republican National Committee with George Bush.
Being a member of the National Committee, and the National Committee comprises of both a National Committee man and a National Committee woman from each state, including Guam and Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the National Committee who elects the co-chairman. The chairman is usually chosen by the president. So they voted, and I was it.
And how long did you stay in that role?
I stayed in that role for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it just got so stressful because of the Watergate situation and all, and I was just doing nothing but traveling here, there, and everywhere, making speeches, and I thought, well, there's got to be a little bit something out there than having to have this stress. So I went with the Department of State.
I think you told me an interesting story at one point having to do with Vice President Agnew.
Yes, a little farm girl from Winters never ever thought that she'd end up at the White House and with the president and a vice president and so forth. And when I had a speaking engagement in Los Angeles, Vice President Ted Agnew was there with Judy, his wife. And of course I knew them from being back in Washington. So after I got done with my speech, we were both up at the head table, and Ted said, "Janet, could I speak with you after this is over?" And I said, "Certainly." We were in a hotel, so there was a room there that we could have a private room. And we went into the room, and I had no idea what he wanted to talk to me about. And Judy was with him, and come to find out, Frank Sinatra was on the outside of the door waiting for our meeting to be over so he could take Agnew back down to Palm Springs with him. And so I was sitting there, sat down, and I said, "What's the matter? You know, what do you want to talk about?" And he said, "Janet," he said, "I don't know what to do." He said, "I need to talk to you." And I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "They're accusing me of things, and I need to really think about whether I should resign or not." And I said, "Oh, Ted, what's going on?" And he started crying. And I never ever thought I'd ever be in the presence of the vice president of our country and see him in tears. And he's asking this 32-year-old lady, you know, what should I do? So I told him, I said, "Well, Ted," I said, "buck up. If you are innocent, fight like heck. Stand up. But if you're guilty of what they're accusing you of, then I would resign." And that was the end of the conversation. Judy was crying, he was crying. So anyway, they left, and it was about 3 days later he resigned.
So do you ever miss the life that you were in at those levels of government?
Did I what?
Did you miss the level of life that you were put in at that stage in your life, those high levels of government?
Well, you're asking if
if you miss the life that you were involved with.
Oh, if I miss it?
Yes.
No, not really. No, I'm down to earth. I love everybody. I don't care whether they're in Washington or Winters. I don't miss anything. I'm just always looking forward to the next challenge, you might say.
Well, I mean, it's such a huge arc of life to come from a small country ranch and then wind up on that world stage and then be happy to leave it behind and return to Winters. So in looking back, what do you think has made Winters this special place for you?
Well, it's my city, you know, and I think you always have a soft spot in your heart for the area that you were born and raised in. I think everybody does, unless they have a terrible life. I don't know, but not in my case.
And so we kind of covered a wide range of things because you've had such a remarkable life in all these various areas. So, but is there something else that you'd like to include today in what we've talked about?
Well, I guess there's some funny things I could tell you about.
Well, feel free.
Well, one is, you know, you have the Hollywood picture of the embassy person who has a briefcase with a handcuff on it that you have to take, you know, a courier, is what I mean to say. So I was chosen to have to take some stuff down to Nice from Paris, and then end up in, I will go to Lyon, and then Marseille, and then end up in Nice to give to our consulates there. So I thought, well, that's kind of neat. I'll just have a briefcase with handcuffs on my wrist and away I'll go. Well, I went in to check in the morning, and you have to sign your life away. And you're told, do not let it get out of your sight. So I said, okay, yeah, I have to do it, I'll do it. Well, it was not a briefcase with a handcuff on my wrist. It was a parachute filled with passports. They even had some stuff from the English embassy in Great Britain in it, and it must have weighed a good 35 pounds. And there's no way, and it had a strap around it with a lead seal on it. So there was no way that you could really carry the thing. You had to drag it. Well, I got on the train, and I had the embassy fella, help me put it on the train. And they put it up on top of they have compartments, and there's a shelf above the compartment for your suitcases and things. So he struggled lifting that thing and putting it up on top of that shelf. So we take off on the train, and away we go. And we get to Lyon, and then we get to Marseille, and then we get to Nice. Well, finally, there was this one man and his wife, and I was sitting in the compartment, wouldn't dare go anywhere, but I had to go to the restroom. So I struggled and took that doggone thing off the shelf, drug it down the car to where the restroom was, and opened up the restroom door, and you could hardly push it through. Then I had to jump over it and then try to close the door. But well, anyway, that was my experience as being a diplomatic courier. And then it came for lunchtime. We went to the dining car, dragging this darn parachute, putting it opposite of me at the table, and everybody in the grandmother's aunt was thinking, well, is this woman sane? She must be awfully poor because she doesn't have a suitcase. She's got a parachute. Well, anyway, long story short, we finally terminated at Nice, and this French man and his wife were in the compartment. And I thought, oh, now, how am I going to get off this? So I got the darn thing and started dragging it. And he says, excuse me, mademoiselle, but let me help you with that. And I said, well, no, you can't touch it. And he said, no. And I said, no, but I appreciate you, wanting to help me. And he said, well, I have to tell you, if it weren't for you Americans, we wouldn't be here. I wanted to do something to be thankful that you liberated us and wanted to help you. And I thought, well, you see, our dear soldiers who fought, some of whom lost their lives, there are still people alive that appreciated that in their country. So
that is a wonderful wrap-up, I think, to your incredibly unique life story. And I just want to say I really appreciate your willingness to share all of these stories with our community today. So thank you, Janet.
Well, thank you, Susan, and it's an honor that you chose me to have this interview, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.